Hello and welcome back to the online learning session. Today we'll be moving ahead in chapter 2, Socialism in Europe and the Russian Revolution. Let us see the topics to be covered in this lesson. Number 1, theories by Robert Owen, Frederick Engels, Louis Blanc and Karl Marx. Number 2, formation of bodies in support of socialism. Number 3, the Russian Empire in 1914. And number 4, economy and society of Russia, especially in the context of workers and peasants during the Russian Empire. Now let us begin our discussion from the theories put forward by Robert Owen, Frederick Engels, Louis Blanc and Karl Marx. Students, we see the most burning question of that point of time after the advent of socialism in Europe was, how could a society without property operate? We have learnt that people were getting against owning of private properties, especially the socialists. So how could a society without property operate, and what would be the basis of socialist society? Therefore we see that socialists had different visions of the future, and in this series we see that some believed in the idea of cooperatives. So in this entire session, as far as theories put by different sorts of socialists is concerned, we will see the concept of cooperatives. Now number 1, Robert Owen, 1771-1858, he was a leading English manufacturer, sought to build a cooperative community. I hope you are well versed with the concept of cooperatives. For example, when a lot of people come together for a specific purpose, for sharing and caring each other for a specific purpose, that sort of a society is known as a cooperative society or a community. So basically, in a cooperative, people tend to cooperate with each other and they look for a collective welfare of each and every people of the society. So what do we see here? A leading English manufacturer sought to build a cooperative community called New Harmony in Indiana, USA. But we also see at that point of time that other socialists felt that cooperatives could not be built on a wide scale only through individual initiative. They actually wanted the support of the governments in order to encourage cooperatives. Next we come to learn about Louis Blanc. He belonged to France. He wanted the government to encourage cooperatives and replace capitalist enterprises. These cooperatives were to be associations of people. Now this is an important point which you need to note down. Associations of people who produced goods together and divided the profits according to the work done by members. So this could be a fine definition of cooperative society or cooperatives. Okay students, so you can pick out the definition of the cooperative society or cooperative communities as well from this point, that the cooperatives were going to be associations of people who produced goods together and divided the profits according to the work done by members. So this is what we have studied. They worked for collective welfare. They didn't work for individual benefits. They worked for society as a whole. Now we come to learn about Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. The most important concept which they put forward was related to capitalism. We see that Karl Marx argued that the industrial society was capitalists. Capitalists owned the capital invested in factories, and the profit of capitalists was produced by workers. This we have already studied in our previous lecture, that the workers worked for these capitalists, these industrialists. They reaped the benefits of the work done by workers, and not the profits were shared among workers. Now they argue that conditions of worker could not improve, of course, as long as the profits were not shared among the workers. Workers had to overthrow capitalism and the rule of private property. So therefore they had to organize themselves into cooperatives. Workers had to overthrow capitalism. Why? Because we see the issues related to capitalism as far as the workers were concerned and the rule of private property. Only then the benefits could be shared among the workers. Next point, we see that Marx believed that to free themselves from capitalist exploitation, workers had to construct a radically socialist society where all property was socially controlled. So the most important point which he made here is the property to be socially controlled. It was not to be controlled by the capitalists, it was not to be controlled by the industrialists, but by the society as a whole. And this is what is known as a communist society. This is what we know as a communist society. This point needs to be highlighted. And here if I ask you, what do you mean by a communist society? So we see that a society where all property is socially controlled, that society is known as a communist society. Karl Marx was convinced that workers would triumph in their conflict with capitalists. Provided they organized themselves very nicely, they could win this battle against capitalists, and a communist society therefore was the natural society of the future. Therefore he also projects and predicts that communist society was the natural society of the future, where all property was to be socially controlled. So this is what we learned in the theories put by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Now we are going to study about formation of bodies in support of socialism. Now, as the concept of socialism was expanding in Europe, we see a lot of bodies also coming up in support of socialism. So let us go through the text and try to learn some of the international bodies which were formed at that point of time in order to support socialism. Students, we see that by 1870s, socialist ideas are spread through Europe. This is a very important point, students. Here we are not talking about any one country or two countries specifically. We are talking about Europe as whole. Okay, and in Europe we see that to coordinate the efforts, socialists formed an international body. They formed an international body, namely the Second International. Here is a question as well, that which body was formed in order to coordinate the efforts of the socialists. Clear? So the answer will be Second International. Next we will be seeing what were the developments in England and Germany at that point of time, which was mostly made by the workers. So we'll see the efforts by the workers. Students, we see that workers in England and Germany began forming associations. An important point here, we see that workers start organizing themselves into associations. Now they have come to reach an association in order to fight for better living and working conditions. As we have already studied that long working hours, poor wages and poor living conditions were the issues, were the bone of contention between the government and the workers of that point of time. Therefore we see that they formed their associations in order to fight for better living and better working conditions. Second, what do we see? We see another important point, that they set up funds. They set up funds to help members in times of distress, means in times of problem, in times of facing issues, and also demanded a reduction of working hours and the right to vote. So students, we see two demands here and one important development here. See students, that they set up funds, they contributed their income, they contributed their money, which was going to help the members of the association in times of distress, in times when they faced miseries, in times when they faced problems, in times when they faced issues in their lives. And two most important demands: number one, they also demanded reduction of working hours, and second, they also demanded right to vote. So two demands and one important development. Next we see SPD. In Germany, these associations worked closely with the Social Democratic Party, named as SPD, and helped it win parliamentary seats. Okay, now we can see that these associations of workers, the associations here, we see the associations which are formed here, now they are getting in closer contact to the political parties as well, and they are also trying to establish a bit of political hold in the society. So what do we see? They were working closely with the Social Democratic Party and also helped it win parliamentary seats. In a series of another significant development, we see the formation of Labour Party. As the name suggests, you can easily figure out that what was this party all about. So we see that by 1905, socialists and trade unionists formed a Labour Party in Britain and a Socialist Party in France. So we now see that associations like SPD, Labour parties are now being formed in different parts of Europe, such as Labour Party in Britain and Socialist Party in France. And another important question which arises here is that which party was formed in Britain by 1905 and which party was formed in France by 1905. Clear? Let us move ahead. Now we come down to Unit 2, students. Our Unit 1 has completed, where we will see about the Russian Revolution, and actually we are going to see about the Russian Empire in 1914. we are going to learn about what was Russian Empire all about in 1914. So as we have seen that it was ruled by a monarch at that point of time, and who was that monarch? The ruler was Tsar Nicholas II. The Tsar was the title of the rulers in Russia, as the title of the rulers in France was Louis. Clear? Now this Tsar is also written as CZAR, so there is no point of difference. Just make it sure. Now what do we see? We see that in the second point, we see the parts, the regions which comprised the Russian Empire at that point of time. So let us go through the regions. They were Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. It also included parts of Poland, Ukraine and Belarus. Now it's said that it stretched to Pacific and comprised modern day Central Asian states. Now here we are talking about the Central Asian states. We'll be going to a map in a second, like Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the Orthodox Christianity, the traditional form of Christianity, was the prominent religion in this Russian Empire, although people of different religion also existed, also lived in this empire. Now what do we see, students? You will need to memorize the parts of Russian Empire, because if we talk about empire, we need to also go through its extent. We need to learn about the regions, we need to learn about the parts which comprise an empire, otherwise we won't be able to signify, to figure out what an empire actually means. So here there are lots of regions, as you can see. So here I am going to give you a short trick. I will be giving you a very short trick to remember all the parts of the Russian Empire, so that it becomes easier. And it goes like file of PUBG. This is file, this is PUBG. Clear? So what do all these alphabets stand for? F for Finland, okay, FI, in fact, L for Latvia, the second L for Lithuania, E for Estonia, P for Poland, U for Ukraine, B for Belarus and G for Georgia. Now when you come to G, just make a pointer hook there and take out Armenia and Azerbaijan as well. So in this form you can memorize the regions of the Russian Empire. File of PUBG becomes the trick for you to remember the regions of the Russian Empire. Now students, this is how the Russian Empire looked in 1914. Okay, this is how it looked in 1914. The region, this region you can see here, you can identify Finland. I want the rest of the regions to be identified by U. Next we come down to learn about economy and society of Russia. How was the economy? What was the economy of Russia all about? What was the society of Russia all about? Which kind of people did it comprise? So this is all what we are going to learn about in this slide. Clear? So students, we see that 85% of the population was dependent on agriculture. It means that the agriculture was the most dominant economic activity of that point of time, but which falls in by the way, primary sector. But we also see industry to be occurring in pockets, to be found in pockets. Pocket here means certain regions, certain selected regions of a huge empire. So what do we see actually? St. Petersburg and Moscow. In St. Petersburg and Moscow, industry could be found in pockets. We also see craftsmen to be doing most of the work there. Craftsmen also existed in that kind of a society. And in 1890s we see that the most of the factories were established. Railway network expanded in that period. Foreign investment came in Russia at that point of time. So this is an important development as far as the economy and the society of Russia is concerned. We see in the fifth point that government kept an eye. Now this is an important point again. In a bid to becoming a socialist society, we see that government is keeping an eye to ensure minimum working hours and the wages, to ensure that the workers were working for the minimum working hours and they got the wages from the industrialists as pledged by the industrialists. Students, we also see, however, minimum working hours and wages were ensured. Government tried to keep an eye on most of the industrialists. However, some of the industrialists often broke rules. We see that rules were often broken, and that also with impunity. Impunity here means without being punished. Okay, so the industrialists at most of the times were exempted from the punishment as well. They escaped being punished, and rules were often broken in this kind of society. It means what? It simply means that the minimum working hours was not ensured by the industrialists, plus the minimum wages which were pledged were also not given to the workers. And we see that accommodation for the workers was there in the rooms and dorms or dormitories. So students, when we were studying about the industrial society and social change, we have already seen that there was a problem of housing and sanitation. So the housing here means the accommodation where the workers were going to live in the cities, okay, or where the factories were located. So accommodation for them were arranged in dorms and rooms. Next we see workers, the section of the society of the community of workers. Okay, now let us see. Workers comprised different social groups in that society. We find that they had strong links with ancestral villages. They had very strong links with the ancestral villages, with their villages. They were divided by skill, and metal workers were on top. If suppose, what does this point actually mean? They were divided by skill and metal workers were on top. It means that if there were 5 different kinds of workers in a society, for example, railway workers, dock workers, artisans, craftsmen, metal workers. So the metal workers were there on the top in the hierarchy. It means they had a good status, they had a good position in the society. If this is a hierarchy, then metal workers were on the top and the rest of workers were in the later stages. Okay, now we see that workers' dress also manifested such divisions. For example, metal workers wore different kind of a dress, then the other workers such as railway or dock worker wore other kind of a dress. So the dress also manifested these kinds of divisions, which we see in point number 3, that workers were divided on the basis of skill. So according to skills they wore dresses, and these dresses, different types of dresses. For example, let us assume if metal worker is on the top, he is wearing a red dress. If craftsmen or other workers like a railway worker is there, they are working blue dress. So you can understand it like that different sorts of dresses were also there for different types of workers, which manifested these divisions basically. Now we see, and point number 3 and 4 leads us to a very important point 5. Okay, students, here we see they often united to strike against unjust practices of factory owners. Students, in point number 3 we have seen that these workers were divided. Now on what basis were they actually divided? They were divided on the basis of their skills. Although they were divided on the basis of their skills in the society, they often united to strike against the unjust practice, the unfair practices of factory owners. When there was a call for a united action, all the workers, be it any of the worker of the society, came together to strike against the unfair practices being meted out to them. Clear? So this was all about workers. Now we move on to learning something about peasants. Now we come down to learning about peasants. Okay, so students, we see that peasants had no respect for nobility. Clear? They had no respect for nobility. They wanted the land to be given to them. What happened at that point of time? Nobles used to occupy and own all the land, and peasants used to work for the nobles. That is why we see that peasants had no respect for nobility. Why could have this been at that point of time? Why the situation could have been this? Because we see that they were not paid properly, the working hours were not fixed, they were living in very very poor conditions, their conditions was very very miserable. That's why we see that they had no respect for nobility, they just worked for nobility, and they kept on wanting that the land should be transferred to them. One of the core concepts of socialism, which works for peasants and workers, actually, that land must be transferred to the peasants, because it is the peasant who works on the land, it is the peasant who actually makes the land productive by his efforts, by his blood and sweat. So the peasants believed that the land must be a property which must belong to them. And in the series we see that the peasants often refused to pay rent and murdered landlords as well. A very significant point. Important feature is that they pooled their lands periodically. We have seen the concept of cooperatives. Now pooling here means accumulating, collecting something, okay, from each and every person. So as we have seen that the concept of cooperative was already making its place in the society of Europe, they started pooling their lands periodically, they started contributing their lands together, and this contribution on the basis of a community comes to be known as commune. So the commune or mir divided the land. The commune or mir divided the land according to the needs. Students, let us try to understand point number 5 by an example. Okay, let us assume that X and Y are two students who are having 5 rupees each. Clear? And A, B, C are the students who are having 50 rupees each. Clear? X and Y go to the cafeteria of the school and they want to have something which could fill their stomach, and at the same point of time they do not have sufficient amount of money, but we see that they have a good bonding with A, B and C. We have A, B and C, which we see have a good bonding with X and Y. It means that all of them are friends. Clear? So what do? A has 50 rupees, B has 50 rupees and C has 50 rupees, and X and Y have 10 rupees each. So all the money is pooled together. Okay, all the money, the X and the Y and the A and the B and the C collect their money. So it becomes 150 plus 20, 170. Now together they have 170 rupees. Clear? And the total amount of people, total amount of persons is 5. So if we divide this by 5, we get how much? We get 34 rupees each. So whatever you get around 30 rupees or 34 rupees could be now easily distributed among 5 members. Okay, any food product, any food item which is around 30 or 35 rupees could be afforded by all these 5 people and could be distributed among 5 friends. So this is how this concept of commune or mir worked at that point of time. When people came together as a community, it meant commune. It has also been highlighted in point number 6 that a group of people living together. First of all, understand the meaning. First point, a group of people living together. First point. And second point is that sharing possessions and responsibilities. Whatever they have, they used to share among each other. Okay. So here we see the same concept, that mir divided the land according to the needs. So whoever was in need was then distributed the land with. Okay, and we also get to see that they had a long tradition of working in close associations. The peasants had a long tradition. For example, the mir was to be functioning from a long time, from a long period of time in that society, and we see that they had a long tradition of working in close associations as well. So what do we actually learn today, students? We have learned that socialism was gradually making its place in the society of Europe, and a lot of theories were also put forward by different socialists who came forward, like Robert Owen, Frederick Engels, Louis Blanc, Karl Marx, etc. A few of the persons spoke about cooperatives. Karl Marx and Frederick Engels were seen to be speaking about the concept of capitalism, and that the private property should not rule the society, rather a society should be ruled by the people who control the complete property. Okay, it meant a government which has control over the property and not by the individuals. Okay, and therefore we come to learn about that this kind of society was also known as communist society. The points to be picked out are written, and communist society was going to be the future. Okay, next we see that formation of bodies in support of socialism. So we learnt about the second international, number one. Then we came to learn about the associations made by the workers, and one important point was SPD, and the second important party was Labour Party. Clear? So 3 points to be picked up from here: second international, associations of workers, then they set up funds, SPD and Labour Party. Next we learnt about the Russian Empire in 1914, and we learnt about the regions comprising the Russian Empire in 1914, which comprised Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. And we see that Orthodox Christianity was the prominent and dominant religion in that region. Next we see the economy and society. When we see 85% of the population was dependent on agriculture, so agriculture was the dominant economic activity. However, some industries were also seen in pockets. Now government started keeping an eye on the industrialists who did not ensure minimum hours of working and minimum wages. However, we also see that the rules were often broken with impunity. Next we came to learn about the workers, and we see, however, they were different social groups. They were linked by their ancestral villages. Second point, we see they were divided by the skills. We see workers' dresses also manifesting such divisions. However, one of the very significant points is that they often united to strike against unjust practices of factory owners. And next we come to learn about the peasants, where we have seen that they had no respect for nobility. They strongly believed that lands must be transferred to them. Therefore they often refused to pay rent and often murdered their landlords. They also had an important feature of pooling their lands periodically, and the community which did this was known as commune or mir. This divided the land according to the needs. Okay, and they had a long tradition of working in close associations like this. So the crux is that we see people tend to come together and they are unifying in order to struggle against all the unjust practices of some people in the society. So that's it for today, students, and we'll meet in the next lesson. Thank you.